Hello, everybody. Welcome to my event and my speech. I just wanted to give everybody a quick couple minutes as they will file in here as we get started. I put up my LinkedIn profile up here in the chat. So if anyone wants to connect with me, grab in the LinkedIn profile. And let me just stop sharing and resharing for a second because I did not go into presentation mode. So let me get back and go into presentation mode and then reshare. There we go, and share this baby out. Woo! Okay, let's stop sharing. We'll go this way since, there we go. So welcome again, everybody. We have about 15 minutes. So my session is all around expectations and running expectations, both as a leader and both as a salesperson. So before we get started, as we have a couple of people in here, let's go to the poll real quick. And I'd love to know what your role is. Are you a sales manager and leader, or are you an individual contributor? And then after that part, if you can let me know, when you were hired, what percentage of the expectations were actually met as you guys were actually going into your job. So what I've realized is that these expectations are super important as you're running. So let me open up the first poll and see if who's in here as a leader or as a manager, and the other person is people are individual contributors. So give that a few minutes to roll. So we have a 60-40 split. So that's pretty good. Let's 60% individual contributors and 40% leaders or managers. And let me just open up the other one real quick. After you were hired, what percentage of the expectations were met? Was it less than 25%, between 25 and 50%, 50% and 75%, or 75% and greater? Just kind of curious, as you were getting hired or as you were getting into a new job, they were setting expectations with you. You guys were both having conversations, and how did that actually play out? Give that another minute or so, and then we will get rolling here. So fairly interesting split. 20%, let me just close this off. 20%, less than 25%, 25 to 50%, 40% of the people, and then 40% were 50% to 75%. So really, really interesting. Quick agenda, just a definition of expectations. I think we all have expectations, but I think we all have different expectations. Aligning those expectations, building on the expectations. So once you have expectations as a leader or individual contributor, how do you actually integrate and build upon those expectations? Because they're never going to stay the same. And then just some quick takeaways and questions that we can have. So if I go to my next slide. So I thought this picture was funny. I just joined my current company about 6 months ago, and I've done 7 different startups in about 4 different countries. And the way I always feel about startups or growth companies is it's always like feeling like you're changing wheels as you're driving the car. So as you're going through the process, you're like changing these wheels and trying to figure them out. And then what ends up happening is everyone has these expectations. For example, you may have an expectation, your quota is $2 million. Your quota is $1 million. You get into the operations and you find out that there's no pipeline, or the people that are actually trying, you have no SDRs, or the content isn't what you need it to be, or the product's not working, and you're changing these wheels on the fly. So if I go through to the next slide, when we talk about expectations, so when we look at expectations, it's about definition. It's about the act of expecting or anticipation, something that you're expecting. So I love this quote from Simon Sinek that says, more information is always better than less. when people know the reasons that things are happening, even if it's bad news, they can adjust those expectations and act accordingly. So I think in many cases, when we're looking to drive through that expectation world, they may be good, they may be bad, but you need to have really solid expectations going into any particular situation. It could be a company, it could be a job, it could be a relationship. But let's have that conversation and make sure that we're having the conversations that may be hard and may not be always comfortable. So if we run through to the next slide, so when we work from home, like an expectation as you're getting into a new job is, hey, we can work from home, or the pandemic is, hey, we can work from home. But the reality is, at 4 a.m. you're still working, and your significant other or anyone else in the organization, they may be saying, are you coming to bed? Are you going to spend some time with us? So the expectation from working from home may be one thing, but actually the reality of working from home could be a completely different world. And we want to make sure that we're not only setting those expectations, but then we're allowing those expectations to grow over time. You may have this conversation with your boss, or you may have a conversation with a peer, or even someone that reports up into you. But the reality is you need to make sure that you look at those expectations over time. So if we look at it from a sales perspective or a sales leader perspective, which is where I come from, when you're coming into a new company, you look at it, hey, you have targets that you're looking to hit. So let's say you get a target of $2 million that you need to close before the end of the year. When you actually get into that organization, you start looking through their pipeline, and you start looking at the deals, and you start asking really hard questions. You may find out that even though you thought you had a $6 million pipeline, which would be 3x, you actually only have $4 million in pipeline or $2 million in pipeline. And then you have to reset the expectations. Okay, Mr. Boss, I know you said that you thought I could close $2 million in business, but the reality is our pipeline can only sustain $1 million in closed business. So you have to have those conversations and be ready to have courageous conversations. The next part is, once you get those expectations from yourself and your boss, you need to actually push those expectations down to everybody else that's in your organization, people reporting to you, your peers. In sales, what I've seen most unsuccessfully happen is that you get expectations and you don't actually communicate the why. You need to have a communication of why those expectations are happening. I need you to update Salesforce because when I go to the board, or when I go to the directors, or when I go to give the forecast, we need to make sure that that information is tight and right. And it's not about tracking a individual salesperson. It's also about creating those expectations and being able to have those courageous conversations. And then finally, in my world, a lot of times it's systems and processes. Here's a sales process. So you go into a new organization, go into a new job. You think you have a sales process. You think you have some kind of other process that's working properly, and you may need to fine tune it. But you may find out that process actually needs to be done even more or exponentially than you actually thought. So what you thought may have taken 4 or 5 hours may take 4 or 5 days or 4 or 5 months. And so once you figure that out and you level set, you have to go back to the organization, go back to your boss, go back to your peers and say, I know what I thought was X for an expectation is now Y for an expectation. And in those expectations, you have to be able to say, I was wrong or they were wrong, and you have to be able to move on from it. So a few takeaways I just want to have as we go through the final pieces of this is have courageous conversations. Like, I think this is where most people are really struggling. So if you're getting hired or you're going through a new job, be honest, be upfront, have those courageous conversations. Make sure that you are aligned expectations. So you may have expectations, but let's not assume that the people that you're talking to have aligned expectations or understand what those expectations may be. Those assumptions will kill you. Visit and revisit these expectations early and often. I can't tell you how many times you'll have a conversation, you have a $2 million quota, and either the sales leader or someone else is afraid to speak up to the CEO, to the board. This isn't realistic. Based on the data, not your feelings, but it's got to be data driven. Let's take the emotions out of it and say, based on the data that I have, you cannot actually hit that number because it's just not going to be possible. yes, we can have a stretch goal, but you're not actually going to be able to hit those numbers. And then finally, what I see over and over again, communicate to your team and your peers and over communicate. It's just not about telling them one time, here's the expectation and here's why, and they go on and run your business. It's continuously having those conversations, especially if you go back up and you're revisiting the expectations. You have to reset those expectations. Then you got to go to everyone else in the organization and make sure they're on the same page as well. So I'm not sure how I'm doing on time because I can only see one screen at a time. I have about 4 minutes left. So any questions, any comments, anything that anyone has on expectations? One of the reasons why I did this expectation conversation was all about, I did a process inside of LinkedIn and everyone was talking about expectations. Everyone seemed to not have a good reason why they're building expectations or how to build on expectations. So curious, anyone have any comments, questions? Put them in the chat. We can chat about them. Cool. So one question I have gotten in the past is, how do you actually have these courageous conversations? Like, what ends up happening? Where can you get to a place of having courageous conversations? And I got this piece of advice from a business coach of mine, Dwayne Cummings, and he always talks about these courageous conversations. In courageous conversations, it's not always about you. It's about both of the people that are in that conversation and making sure that you guys are level set and aligned. A lot of times as leaders or as someone reporting up into a leader, they're afraid to challenge that leader. And if you're in a situation where you can't have that conversation and you can't have conversations based on data and information, you're probably in the wrong place, or that leader isn't strong enough to be able to take the information, because every leader should be wanting to learn and grow from the people that are around them all the time. So make sure that those courageous conversations are happening. Try to test them as you're going into a new organization. If you're being hired or if you're being pushed into a leadership role or into a new role themselves, make sure you're asking the questions that you know that are in your gut, but sometimes you're afraid to ask because you're afraid of the answer being no, or you're afraid of backlash. I would rather understand getting backlash earlier in the process. And if you get that earlier feedback, then maybe it's not the right situation for you and not being able to go to that organization. So I have about 2 minutes. I don't see any other questions. So I appreciate you guys joining. If you guys want to connect with me, go over on the LinkedIn, click on my information. I love to interact and engage with you guys. And I appreciate you guys taking the time to come have a conversation on expectations. Thanks, everybody.